Okay, great. I'm Robin Riddle with Stanford, and we are so excited to welcome today Steve Yellen. Steve is an engineer by training, and he was diagnosed in 2019 in 2019 at age 55 with Parkinson's disease. And he's turned him to looking at data, research, personal experimentation, other people's experiences to understand how to manage Parkinson's disease for himself. And he's written a wonderful new book called Living Parkinson's. And it details 7 strategies for living a full life with renewed purpose. So we welcome Steve to our conversation today. Thanks so much for joining us, Steve.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, and I also wanted to mention at the outset, and also I'll try to remember to mention it at the end, that Steve, in addition to this book, Living Parkinson's, also has a website called livingparkinsons.com, and you can join his uh, email newsletter list, e-newsletter list. And is it just published monthly, Steve? Is that your newsletter?
Yeah, I just try to put something out every month, just kind of giving updates, and probably it could end up being every other month. It's not going to be anything that anybody overly spams people with, and they can always unsubscribe if they want. So,
Yeah. Well,
and
I think I've only received 2 emails from you once per month, and it's nice to have a limit to the number of emails one receives. I think so.
I
I
definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a tolerable amount. Um, so you, as I said, were diagnosed in 2019 at age 55, and you initially lived like nothing in your life had changed. And what did you learn was good, and what did you learn was bad about that approach, the approach that, oh, nothing's changed for me?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So when I was first diagnosed, the first thing they told me was Parkinson's doesn't impact your life expectancy. And I will admit that it took me about 2 or 3 days to get the guts up to actually Google that because I was scared to see what I would come back. But I went to a couple doctors for a second opinion and a third opinion, and they all said the same thing. And to some extent, it was positive because I didn't let it affect my life. I didn't get down as a result of it. But on the other hand, I also didn't do anything to take any proactive approach. And that was probably for a couple of years. And I think there's a good and a bad to that, really, right? The good is you don't want it to be a dark cloud over your head. But what I've tried to do since then is use it as motivation. So I think if you can use it as motivation, having it be a part of you is something that can be a positive. And that's kind of what those first 2 years kind of did for me, is just let me learn some of that.
And then what did you so what happened after the first couple of years? What led you to change your approach?
It was probably a couple of things. I don't know if there was an exact aha moment, but what had happened is, one thing is I got genetic testing done. I'd started getting involved in a couple of observational studies and a couple of trials, and I had some genetic testing done. And I learned that I didn't have any of the genes associated with Parkinson's. I got into a study where they basically assigned me an occupational therapist who would talk to me a lot about the value of exercise, and I really learned about things like activity minutes and how exercise potential different types of exercises to do and what to do to try to impact the progression. And at the same time, at one of my appointments with my doctor, he wanted to put me on Cinemed or carbidopa levodopa. And I think those three things together kind of set off a spark with me to say, look, maybe sitting and letting this sit in the background wasn't the right thing, that I need to really immediately start digging in and learning as much as I can and figuring out what do I really need to do to try to, especially with the progression, to try to impact the progression and live the best life I could.
Right. And in your book you talk about a moment one and a moment two. And I think you've kind of already alluded to moment one, but could you say a little bit more about that?
Sure. So really the moment one was kind of that point in time. I kind of look at it as that convergence of a couple of things that got me to say, hey, I've got to get proactive. If I had to kind of assign a moment one, it would probably be when my doctor wanted to put me on the medication, because I always viewed that as, I'm kind of losing ground.
Mm.
But the next thing, really, the moment too, is I was at a conference here locally in Connecticut, and there was a speaker from Yale, Dr. Sule Tinaz, who's done some research on exercise and Parkinson's, and she showed two pictures of two brains. One where the second one was lit up a lot more than the first one, showing that the area of the brain that produces dopamine cells was much more energized after 6 months of high intensity exercise. And I went to chase her down after the presentation and talk to her, and I said, "This is fantastic. I'm really excited about that. How much exercise should you do? Because if you tell me 3 days, is 5 days even better?" And she kind of said that's an example of self-efficacy. And I didn't know what that was, but that one I went home and I was excited to Google. And what I learned about it was somebody from actually Stanford University, Dr. Albert Bandura was the one who kind of came up with the concept, the psychological concept. And it's really a person's belief that they can impact their own situation, whether it's health or something else. And there's actually ways you can actually drive more self-efficacy. And what I kind of realized at that point was I had the spark and the energy at my moment one, but my moment two, learning about self-efficacy, said, wait a minute, there's a tool out there that I can actually use to take advantage of to try to basically drive myself even more and more, give myself more motivation. And that really, to me, was the point that I really shifted my attitude and learned I wanted to dig into self-efficacy, learn as much as I could about it. And then one of the things that stood out to me was the concept of setting short-term goals that once you achieve them really motivates you on to the next, to the next. And I've really since become almost like a big believer in that philosophy in any aspect of your life when you're taking on any large challenge.
Hmm. And indeed, your subtitle of your book refers to 7 strategies, and the first strategy is the strategy of attitude. Could you say a little bit more about how attitudes become very important to you?
Yeah, a lot of that really falls into the self-efficacy, just trying to be proactive. Because one of the other things I learned is, as part of the book, as you mentioned, I interviewed both researchers who obviously I learned from, and I interviewed people that I felt were also living Parkinson's, taking that kind of lifestyle approach. And they all expressed some interesting things in their attitude. They all were trying to be as proactive as possible. And you can see how that kind of translates across the other strategies as we get to those. But really just being as proactive as possible and also being grateful for what they can control, which I feel like does fall into that proactivity, the attitude portion also, because there's certain things you can't control with Parkinson's that we all have to deal with. And we all have a different journey with Parkinson's, but there's hopefully certain things that everybody at least have some control over. And I felt like the more you take control over the things you can, the more feeling of control you have, just the better your overall approach would be. And that seemed to be something I heard from a lot of the people I spoke with.
Hmm. Uh, as I recall, there was one. Uh, I love in your book that you have kind of little excerpts from little Q&As, short Q&As that you have with what you call researchers and other people that you describe as living Parkinson's disease and seem to have figured out the right way to live well with PD for themselves. And one of the little excerpts you had was from a physician, and I remember, I don't know if it was a he or a she, but this physician said a researcher said something about, well, if you don't, if you could have an attitude that if you don't do it for yourself, maybe do it for your loved ones or do it for your family, that this would be perhaps a motivation or attitude change for some people.
Yeah, I actually remember that interview. One of the things I was kind of trying to ask was, what do you find is a good way to get people to change their attitude? And, what he said was, I remember explaining to them how, for example, exercise and taking control of certain things can impact your progression. But, everybody's, again, I always try to never make assumptions of anybody else's situation because Parkinson's can impact people's, can have depression impact your impact your attitude. So, I mean, the thing is, there are challenges. Some people have more challenges than others. And, I've been able to kind of take that proactive attitude. Some people it might be more difficult. But one of the things I asked them is, well, what do you tell somebody that maybe struggles with taking that approach? And he said, well, if they don't want to do it if they struggle to do it for themselves, one of the things they can do is, think about your family because you're going to put yourself in a situation where it's going to start impacting your family more and more as your progression, potentially increases. So, that is something he highlighted, which I thought was a good point. But again, I think there's so many different places people can look for inspiration, whether it's family, whether it's other people with Parkinson's, whether it's just for themselves. But again, trying to do anything you can to be, to kind of work yourself. I'm not saying it's easy for everybody, but to work yourself out of that kind of passive approach and been trying to be more proactive, I think really did help a lot of the people I spoke with.
Hmm. Here in the Bay Area, we're very lucky because we have so many Parkinson's support groups, including this one, which is a group that's mostly focused on having guest speakers and education and information about research and information about symptoms and treatment and interviews such as the one we're having today about how real people are coping with Parkinson's disease and living positive, healthy lives. Um, have you joined a local support group in your area? I believe you live in Connecticut. Are you part of a support community there?
Yeah, I think we don't refer to it as a support group. It's almost more of a social group. And one of
Mm-hmm.
the things I try to highlight is, first of all, by just finding the right groups, you'll learn a ton from them. I mean, I learn as much from other people as I do from my doctors and from the research I do. It also is great support, it's great encouragement. But I do think it's very important to find the right group because there are different types of groups. There are some groups that are almost more traditional support groups and I call them, then there's some that are groups of Parkinson's warriors that are trying to do everything they can. There's a gamut. Every group is not right for everybody, but if you find the right like-minded people, you can really form a bond with them and really get encouragement from them. And like you said, that can actually turn your attitude also. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then, I think sometimes classes fit into that, and you can see classes fit into that too, where you do an exercise class and you get the encouragement of other people are going, you get the regimen of having set time of doing it, and you even get the kind of social encouragement from people saying if you end up not going, they'll check up on you and say, hey, what happened? Why didn't you go? So you have that
Yeah.
ability. So there's so
Yeah.
many different resources out there, and if you find the ones that resonate with yourself, I'm always a believer, everybody's wired differently also. Not only do you have different Parkinson's, but we're all different people. We're all motivated ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a big exercise class person. I exercise on my own. Some people just love the classes. That's great, as long
Mm-hmm.
as you're doing something.
Yeah, yeah. Could you talk a little bit about health span rather than lifespan? You mentioned that you were very reluctant to search about what your prognosis was with Parkinson's disease, if you could live as long of a life as anybody without Parkinson's disease. And you've subsequently learned that there's a big difference between lifespan and health span.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a few books out there on it. I wish I could remember the names. But lifespan is basically how long you live. Health span is really how long you live healthy. And what some of these books really argue is you really want to maximize your health span because if the last 5 years of your life you're not living, it's a very low quality of life, then you've in a sense lived less, and you want to maximize the health span rather than lifespan. And again, trying to slow your progression is always a big area. And I think also one of the things that falls into that is wellness, which is one of the strategies I have. And I always think of wellness as tilting the playing field in your favor, right? It might not solve the problem all by itself, but if you do as much as you can to just be as healthy and fit and, even mentally, lower your stress levels, probably it just helps you do a little bit better than if you're not doing that. So it
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, that tilting the playing field is the analogy I like to use.
Right, right. Could you let's move on to your second strategy, which is knowledge, and you described that as taking control of your life through learning. Could you say how education has helped you communicate with your healthcare team about your Parkinson's?
It's a great question. Really, I think education just helps overall because it's almost like, without being, too using analogies too much, but it's almost a military analogy of know your enemy. We're all fighting Parkinson's, and the more we know about it, the more we just know what we can do to live a better life and to slow our progression. But to your point, also when you meet with your doctor, I try to go and meet with my doctor, and I always bring a pad and paper. And I always, for a couple of days before, think about what do I want to tell them about my condition that's changed, but also what questions do I have? And sometimes the first question I ask is I say, so, what are you seeing out there? Anything interesting that you see? And, maybe we'll talk about the GLP-1s, the Ozempics and things like that. He was high on that for a while, but then there was a trial that wasn't as good, didn't show as good of results. I think it's phase three. But, we'll talk about that. And the more you can go and educated, the more you can take advantage of that time with your doctor, where it's not just him examining you, it's you having a conversation with an expert on Parkinson's. And I try to use that, to be, again, just as educated as I am, because the more I know about Parkinson's, the more I might be able to spot something, whether it's even a new symptom or a side effect of maybe the medication I'm taking. But the sooner I can do that, the more I'm still, again, in control of my situation.
Yeah, you mentioned a term in the book which I hadn't heard of before, which is treatment adherence. Could you say a little bit about a treatment adherence and what you mean by that?
Yeah, that's something that I actually found out from some other people also, which is being able to stick to what you're supposed to do, whether it's even your exercise routine. Like I think of my treatment as not only my medication, but everything I want to do by my own, whether it's eating healthy, exercising. And again, the more you know, the more you'll empower yourself to stick to those things. Because again, if somebody just tells you, hey, look, exercise is good, that might not be that motivating. But when you really understand the four different types of exercise recommended by the Parkinson's Foundation, how much of each you should do, what level of intensity you should do, it just probably can help motivate you more to hit those goals because what you then know is, hey, I'm doing the things that are really going to potentially help me as opposed to doing something just because someone tells you to do it.
Yeah, yeah. And similarly, how has education helped you control your anxiety about having Parkinson's?
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, I think for me, just the more I know about it, the more I can kind of feel like, again, I can control it. I mean, there's even an optimism as you keep your eye on the different research that's out there, because I know I've seen so much new stuff come out. You hear about ultrasound as well as, deep brain stimulation's been out for a while. There's antibodies, there's stem cells. A lot of those things are very, new, very new. There's maybe a long lead time before they might get out to the broad market. But still, just hearing what's going on, there is a lot of positivity out there. And again, the more you educate yourself, the more you can kind of see those things happening. And again, just impact your overall approach and attitude.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about strategy one, which is attitude, strategy two, which is knowledge, and then strategy three is support. Can you say how you've built and strengthened the support team around you?
Yeah. So I think of support as like kind of three legs to the support stool. One is just your care team. And with that, the care team can be, first of all, it should always, from what I've heard, again, I'm not a medical expert, starting with a movement disorder specialist, which probably most people in your area have. But also, that team can be much bigger than that. That can include specialists in everything from gastrointestinal to physical therapists. There's the speech therapists to even, just nutritionists. But there, I kind of list some of the different possibilities. There's probably more that I don't have in the book of who might be part of your team. And that's probably a response to what you've learned in your own symptoms. So this is where the strategies overlap. As I learn about things like how Parkinson's can impact your voice, I might find out, wow, my voice hasn't been as strong. Maybe I should see somebody about that. I'll add them to my team. So that's one part of my support team. The other part, which is probably the most basic part, is the friends and family, the people you have for emotional support around you, which is, kind of speaks for itself. The third part is really other Parkinson's people, like we talked about before, in those groups, because those are people you're going to have a great bond with. I imagine you have it with the people on this support group here. They just know exactly what you're talking about when you ask something, or, there's always somebody in the room that does, and they can relate things. And it just gives you, I mean, I felt such camaraderie from other people with Parkinson's that I met. It just really adds to my overall approach. So those are kind of the three legs that I kind of use to kind of build my support team to help me through things.
Mm-hmm. And is there any, to you, a physical benefit of having the right support? or is it mostly a psychological, emotional benefit?
Probably from your care team, the care team aspect, I think there definitely would be a physical because there could be certain symptoms that by bringing a broader team together. And I know there's certain practices. There's one here in Connecticut that's an integrated medicine practice where they actually have on their staff probably 8 different disciplines of doctors that can all treat your Parkinson's. And what they can do is they look at you holistically. And I've seen some people that practice that way. And I think there are some times where certain people might go in, and if you have a doctor looking at you one-dimensionally, they might not be able to see everything that you want them to see. And they might expose something a little bit more when you see a broader team that really could be have a physical impact on your situation based on your symptoms.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay, and then we're coming to the fourth strategy, which is fight. What do you mean by fight? Is that a like a military reference or or what do you mean by fight?
It was a way of basically reflecting exercise in there. To me, because exercise is that one option that we have now that is, at least there's a general feeling, it might not have been proven with a study that that can help progression. That's to me where the fight starts. So in other words, being able to do some exercise, and again, everybody starts at a different place. There's people I know that do marathons that I can never do. There's some people that maybe walking around a track is a big accomplishment. That's great. But trying to basically do as much exercise as you can at the level that's specified by the Parkinson's Foundation, and those 4 different types: the resistance, the aerobic, the balance, and the flexibility. I try to mix up my routine with all that, and that's the crux of my fight back against Parkinson's because that is the one way that at least I'm hoping I'm slowing my progression.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit in detail about your particular exercise regimen?
Probably the core to my regimen, I try to do those 4 types of exercise. And I don't do much classes. I built a gym in my basement during COVID. So I have a whole bunch of like old exercise equipment that I've collected over the years that have things like balance boards in them. I have a speed bag that I try to use for, again, for coordination. I have a exercise bike and elliptical, and I have some weights. So I can kind of get all those different things. So I do have that. But one of the things, again, this is where all the strategies cross over. I really use goals as part of my workout routine. So, the thought of saying, Steve, you have to work out for the next 20 years to slow your progression, that's pretty deep. But,
Sounds horrible.
it really, even for somebody who doesn't mind exercise, it sounds tough. But what
Yeah.
I do is I sign up for athletic events that motivate me. So what I do is, and again, this is just me. I've done the past 3 or 4 years, 2 triathlons, like 3 or 4 Spartan races, and I've raced up the Empire State Building steps each year the past 3 years. But the key to it isn't what I do or how fast I do it, which isn't very fast at all. It's that every 2 months I try to have something on the calendar. So I drive for it. I basically work hard for it. It gets me to exercise. Then when I accomplish it, I feel like it's like throwing a log on the fire. It just gets me more energy to go to the next. And just one example is I did a Spartan race last year where it was really muddy. It took me an hour longer than I wanted. I was covered in mud. I could barely pull my clothes off at the end in the car. And my wife was there and she said, "Well, do you regret doing it?" And I'm like, "No, I'm 62 years old. I'm one of the oldest people here. I have Parkinson's and I finished. I can't wait for the next one." And that's something that I really believe people can mix together, which is goal setting with exercise. And again, it doesn't matter what that goal is. It just matters that you do a goal that is maybe a little bit of a stretch at your level, but when you do it, you feel that level of accomplishment. I come home from these events, and it's not how fast I do it because I'm way in the back of the pack, but I get my medal and I get to put
Mm.
it up on my wall. I have a wall of all my medals, and it's in my workout area. And that motivates me to get the next one and the next one and the next one. And it just helps me stick to my exercise routine. So
Yeah.
you
Could you
think
imagine a goal for somebody who is not as fit, as not as motivated as you are about, participating in triathlons or Spartan events? What would be a smaller goal that, a normal person could achieve or could have for themselves?
Yeah, I will tell you, I hope it comes across in the book. I try to repeat over and over again, your goals are your goals, and you don't measure yourself by anybody else. I never will measure myself by anybody else. I set a goal that's right for me, and that's all that matters. If somebody said, I struggle to do a 5K would be a huge accomplishment, maybe that's your goal. If literally going to the track and walking a lap around the track is an accomplishment, then maybe you work out and try to get to that. Nobody should ever look at somebody else's goals in my mind and basically judge themselves by it. I know
Mhm,
people doing marathons and Ironman triathlons that you could give me 2 weeks and I couldn't get those done. But I don't measure myself by that. And I will say that for all the things I've done, I've had a lot of failures along the way. So
mhm,
I don't consider myself a great athlete. Even before Parkinson's, when I would do some of these events, I would come in way in the back of the pack, like maybe 75th percentile, even when I was fully healthy and younger. So
mhm,
I don't consider myself a good athlete. I consider myself somebody who uses events to just finishing an event to help get them motivated, and that's it.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's something I really try to be very clear about is never measure yourself against somebody else.
Yeah, I think that does come across loud and clear in your book. So that's to your credit. Over your right shoulder, you have your book. Would you mind holding up the cover of your book a little closer to the camera so people can see? I notice you're on a bike here. Is this one of your triathlon events?
Yeah, it's actually one of the triathlons, and one of the reasons I liked it is because it's not about me. My face is down. People have said, "Why do you have your face down?" It's like, well, it's not about me. It's about just the what hopefully I thought looked like a picture of somebody just fighting to basically get on their bike and go. And I can tell you right now, I was one of the last ones on my bike. You can't tell that, but I was not one of the first ones out of the gate. If you actually saw where I was way in the back of the pack.
Yeah, I was also going to ask you why is your head down, but it's very clear that you wanted to make sure that people knew that you were struggling. It was not easy for you.
I think it looks like I'm struggling. I actually think my head was down, to be honest, because I was slipping my feet into my pedals and
Oh,
then I was looking down. So it's kind of a little bit of a cheat there, but I thought the picture, at least, I didn't want the picture to convey he's doing a great job, he's doing this. I just wanted it to convey determination, kind of, which is the spirit of the group, of the book.
yeah. Uh, um, back to your idea of having a personalized exercise program or personalized fitness program, and um, and what would you say to individuals who have never exercised before who want to get started with some sort of a program?
I think a good place to start is probably with actually whoever you're seeing for your Parkinson's or movement disorder specialist. They might be able to recommend you even to a physical therapist because if you haven't exercised much, or you might have, if you have any, especially if you have any other conditions like maybe potentially a heart condition or anything like that, you never want to start any program without having some guidance. Um, I've always kind of been like self-motivated, and I've done events here and there through my whole life, never anything extraordinary. Again, always finishing back of the pack. So for me, but if I ever felt I had something that was, could be a medical issue, I would always make sure I ran it by a doctor. So I probably advise people maybe even work with your movement disorder specialist and ask them what they recommend you do to get started, or based on where you are, what they think the next step would be, or who you could learn from to do it. It could be a therapist.
Yeah, okay, great. And I'll just say here in the Bay Area, we have so many Parkinson specific exercise classes. We have a lot of fitness trainers who are very knowledgeable about Parkinson's. We have a lot of physical therapists very knowledgeable about Parkinson's. So if you're hearing this and you're in the San Francisco Bay Area or even Northern California, we'd be happy to help with some references to people. I agree that asking your physician to start off with is a very good idea because your physician will kind of have some recommendations for you in terms of intensity and what specific exercises might meet your needs. Um, and let me ask a question that came in on the chat, and I failed to say at the beginning. If anybody has a question, please go ahead and type it into the chat or the Q&A box. I'm monitoring those as well. And it doesn't matter if it follows along with what we're talking about. Your questions are far more important than mine. So This person says, I'm wondering if Steve has ever considered DBS as part of his treatment plan. I understand he is managing beautifully, but as some people do consider DBS as an early treatment.
That's an interesting question. I will be honest with you. I hadn't heard many people talk about DBS until they're further along. So I mean, doing it as an early treatment is something that, again, is something I can learn from. I mean, I never knew that in the past. So I haven't really considered it because of how kind of intrusive it is. I probably want to wait just given my situation because I again, I've been lucky. I feel like I can't take credit for my progression being as slow as it has. I won't take credit. I might take a little credit for slowing it down, but I just may have a very non-aggressive form of Parkinson's. So I never want to kind of make those assumptions. But now being about 7 years in, I don't really have off time. I am on meds, but it's a low dose, 3 times a day. And if I'm late with a dose, it doesn't really impact me that much.
Hmm. Hmm.
I've been pretty lucky, and for that reason, at least in my case, I haven't necessarily considered it. Again, one of the things I always try to say is, nothing I ever want to give anybody out of the book is medical advice.
Hmm.
Really examples of ways you can take charge of things, but most of it involves, engaging with your specific movement disorder specialist, finding the right one that has the right attitude that you want, the right approach that you want, and really relying on a two-way conversation to basically make these decisions.
Right, right. Okay, let's move on to the next strategy, which after fight is wellness. And you describe that as, or you say that wellness isn't about doing everything right, it's about doing what gives you the best chance to win. Could you talk a little bit about the four pillars of wellness and how you approach wellness?
Sure. So even before Parkinson's, I've done a lot of reading. I was a big believer. I still am a big believer in the blue zones. I kind of like that approach. And, not as
Could you
big.
say a little bit about what that is for those who don't know blue zones?
So I think Blue Zones was Dan Buhner, I think is the way you pronounce his name. There's a book that's been out. It's probably about 10 years now. They looked at these societies around the world that lived the longest and what they had in common. And they came up with 9 different things that they all did. And it wasn't like fad type things. It was like, kind of a vegetable centric diet, constant movement. It wasn't necessarily exercise class. It was like doing things like gardening, dancing. Um, Even the fact that spiritual people tend to live longer in these societies. Family first, bringing, when grandparents get older, they bring them back in and live with the family. But it's a very interesting theory on like just what it means to, what it takes to live long. HBO also did a special on it. I think it was called something like Live to 100, maybe. They're
Hmm.
interesting shows just to learn that stuff. But what I did with wellness is I kind of have always been kind of into it, and I always like to try to break things down and try to then rebuild them up into like something I can describe very easily. I think it's the marketing person in me, which is what I do for my career. And I have this kind of theory of the 4 pillars of wellness, which is nutrition, exercise, sleep, and then either mindfulness or lack of, reducing stress. And I kind of put it on a foundation of low toxicity living based on a lot of the latest research from people like Ray Dorsey and Michael Open. So that's the way I try to approach, wellness. And exercise is pretty straightforward. We talked about that. It has almost like its own chapter. But nutrition, just trying to do, sticking to things like Mediterranean, mind diet, doing the best you can to stick to those. Sleep, getting the rest you can. Parkinson's can cause lots of problems with sleep, but whenever you, at least what you can control, try to control that. And then reducing stress, which more and more seems to be something that is really so detrimental. I know when I'm anxious, either positive or negative or stressful, my tremor, that accentuates my tremor more than anything else. And when I exercise, I can do a whole Spartan, and my tremor won't be as much as when I get nervous about something. It immediately gets it going. So I feel like stress is something really negative and trying to reduce as much as possible. And then the low toxicity part is just removing any kind of toxins and chemicals from your personal environment. So whether it's shampoos, deodorants, shaving creams, soaps, drinking out of stainless steel or glass cups versus plastic. Those are things that can't hurt. They're small steps and they may not make a difference, but they may make a difference.
Hmm. Can you talk a little bit about hydration, how you get hydration? Do you just drink water or do explore other opportunities for hydration?
Yeah, it's interesting with hydration. At one point, maybe a few years ago, between just all the different doctors I've seen, whether it was my movement disorder specialist, my physician, or maybe even a gastrointestinal, every one of them kept talking about stay hydrated, stay hydrated. I probably still don't do as good as I should because I do
Mm,
drink a fair amount of coffee and I probably don't drink as much water. But I try to, with my medication, I try to just as a habit drink a big full glass of water with the medication. I don't know if it helps, but it makes me feel like I'm gonna get it into my small intestines as quick as possible, which is where it's absorbed. But you can never overhydrate, I guess, right? And there's some tricks I learned that they sell on Amazon, these little zero calorie fruit flavors, squirt things. You can squirt your water to kind of change it up a little bit. Even put
hmm
lemon juice in your water to change it up. But I do try to hydrate as much as possible. I have a glass. I like room temperature water, not cold water. So I use it. I do it through the filter in my refrigerator and leave a cup on the counter all the time. And I finish it, I refill it. So it's kind of out there to remind me. I'm still
Hmm.
not as good as I should be. I also sometimes will try before a meal, drink a big glass of water because it also helps me fill up. So I maybe won't eat as much because sometimes that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, but and it's a good way of just reminding yourself to always get that glass of water. But I think
yeah,
hydration, from what I've heard from my doctors at least, you really always want to stay hydrated.
yeah. Okay, another audience question, which is, what has it been like to share your story openly, and how did people react? Were they accepting, avoiding, or what?
So far it's been really, honestly, for me, it's actually been very empowering because it's been out, my book has been out now for about almost exactly 2 months. And I've actually gotten some very positive feedback. I mean, on social media, people will say, this book has really helped me. It's really been great. Or, some of the reviews online I see from people have been like that. And honestly, the goal of me doing this book is not to make money. Any profits I make, I'm going to give a portion back to charities. It's really just for me to basically help as many people as possible because I'll be honest, almost selfishly, that empowers me to keep going. When people tell me, Steve, this was really a big help, I had some really interesting takeaways, that really motivates me. And one of the things we didn't mention it, but like in the book, I have 35 what you can do today tips, which hopefully some people, if they take 2, 3, 5, 10 away, maybe they're just small things that change what they do. And they're very simple things, like even, like I mentioned, drinking out of a glass cup instead of plastic, or how to set up a Google search alert for something you might be interested in to get more information to learn. Things like that are what I put in there. So for the most part, I felt great about it, and people have been pretty accepting. I've really tried my best to always be not very assumptive, not make any assumptions about anybody else's situation. So I'll never say, well, you should just be able to get out and do that. I know some people are in very different positions with their Parkinson's, the impact it can have on them, both, even from the standpoint of just depression, as well as just their physical symptoms, how long they've had it, and everybody's wired differently. So I think that's one thing that's maybe helped people, I've seen more broad acceptance because I really try to be very unassuming in terms of that.
Yeah, okay. Very good. And please, audience members, keep typing in your questions to the chat or the Q&A. We love to have those. I'll keep going on with my list. Oh, okay. So your next your number 6 strategy is advocacy and making your voice heard. Could you say a little bit about how you've come to believe that advocacy can drive change in the community?
Yeah. I think advocacy, one of the things I learned is, I never thought again of myself as being an advocate, but as I learned more about it, just even talking to other people, you don't, there's lots of ways to formally become an advocate. The Parkinson's Foundation has things like research associates. You can be a research associate. You can review grants for them. You can be an ambassador and go to certain events, or you can just talk to friends and family and educate them about Parkinson's and some of the causes, or you can get involved even with government. But one of the things I found about advocacy is kind of twofold. As I started looking at what I could do, the first couple of things I did with those first chapters we talked about was I changed my attitude and I did what I could for myself. But then I started saying, well, one of my other goals is to get to a cure as fast as possible, or at least maybe not a cure, but some way of stopping the progression so I could basically kind of win my battle. And what I did is I felt like there's certain things you can do, like in chapter 7, we'll talk about research, but advocacy might help get more funds for research, might help get the word out there, might help just even educate providers. And the more you talk about it, and you also do get some motivation yourself by going out there. At least I feel that way. Like when I do something like this, I actually feel I leave here feeling like, wow, I talked to people, I had great questions. Hopefully I answered their questions. Maybe I gave them some tips. That makes me feel good and even pushes me harder on my journey. So I think there's that twofold benefit to advocacy. Just getting your voice out there can help. And there's so many different ways to do it. Again, there's between the Parkinson's Foundation, the Fox Foundation, APDA, all the organizations out there. There's contributing to, like I said, being a research advocate. There's being a grant reviewer. There's being ambassadors. There's going to your state legislature, your local politicians, or even national politicians and speaking. But whatever, if there's anything you're interested in with that, there's so many different ways. Find what kind of fits your mold, because there's certain things that maybe I think are better, I'm more fit for than others, and that's what I try to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question that came in, and Steve, if you could remember to speak loudly, I think
Sure,
either
sure.
you've gotten a little quieter or I've gotten more tired, or both.
It's probably me. It's probably me.
Okay, well, either way, it could certainly be both. All right, the question is, I understand you have an international approach to Parkinson's. Can you explain that more? How does an international approach how you view your Parkinson's challenges?
Well, I mean, I guess from an international approach, I'd love to know a little bit more. The book itself approaches international from the standpoint of I talk to people in different countries just to understand what can an advocate do in their regions and what is kind of the state of Parkinson's there. And just to learn, that Parkinson's is a global issue and it's different in different countries just due to their healthcare systems, the types of government structure they have, and so on. So I think if you're referring to the book, that's really what that was. My personal approach, I can't say it's like an international approach to Parkinson's.
Okay. Yeah, you do. I think it's towards the back of the book, maybe where you list by
Yeah.
country of many countries. You kind of give a snapshot of what's going on in various places.
Yeah, it was more of like, what Parkinson's is global, what's different about maybe other areas, what's the same about maybe other areas around the world, just to kind of
Yeah.
get a bit more of a global appeal, I guess I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Another question came in. What about effects on voice, and what kind of therapy have you been trying out for voice?
Maybe I need some, given that I'm talking quietly, but I haven't done it myself. I can't speak to what types of therapies are out there, but I know that there are. I know that there's actually people that really specifically address voice therapy or voice, Parkinson's voice, how it impacts your voice. There's voice exercises you can do that different classes do. I just don't know that much about them. Again, I would say maybe contact your doctor to learn, but there's definitely and I imagine in your area, there's definitely some that do it.
Yeah, and I'll put our website into the chat. It's parkinsons.stanford.edu. And at our website, we list all the voice therapy programs that are available. There are two major ones, and there are bunch of online voice therapy and swallow therapy, speech therapy classes, some of which are free, some of which are inexpensive. And if you're in Northern or Central California, feel free to reach out to me at Stanford, and I can direct you more specifically, but there's a ton of stuff out there. Um, Okay, one of the things you say about advocacy in your book is that you have found that there are some personal benefits of advocacy, that you have a renewed sense of purpose and a sense, again, of self-efficacy or empowerment. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some events you've gone to that have felt particularly rewarding for you?
You know, honestly, everything I do when I get the message out there, I feel like there's two things, like the living Parkinson's message, kind of, so to speak. It's like even something like this gives me empowerment. It makes me feel good that I'm getting more people, hopefully giving them things that they can do to improve their journey. That gives me satisfaction and motivates me. But there's definitely some things that I've done. I've done some public speaking before and in my career, and I've gone to Washington a couple of times with the Fox Foundation recently, a couple of weeks ago, to actually pitch some of the Connecticut senators and congressmen about increasing research and banning certain pesticides. Those are the things I've actually gotten personally really good motivation out of that. But again, there's so many different ways you can be an advocate on social media, face to face, that I really think it's whatever's right for you to get you the most motivated.
Yeah, and as you point out in the book, there are tons of local events, national events, online events, all kinds of things to all kinds of ways to be involved if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's come to your seventh strategy, which is research. You mentioned very briefly early on that you were involved in the PD generation study, which looked at whether or not you had any known Parkinson's genes, and you said you didn't. And you also participated in a control study about occupational therapy. Could you talk about that study a little bit and what you learned from it?
Yep. I think in general, like in those ones specifically, I learned about the types of exercises I could do and how to hone my exercise regimen. But I think one of the key things I've learned about research is not only are you helping the cause, but you can learn a lot about yourself and get a lot of baseline data about yourself. So whenever I sign up for a study, I really try to take as much time as I can to, again, have conversation with the researcher. Usually it's something in an area that I'm interested in, like exercise, or I was in one study where they did a free colonoscopy on you and did some samples of your biome. And now I have the makeup of my biome, which in the future, if they find that there's even a stronger link between that and Parkinson's, I might have some data that could really help me out. So I think you learn both about yourself as well as even learning just about the disease itself, and you might get some baseline data that can really help you out in the future.
Yeah. About how many studies have you participated in, Steve?
Probably a lot, but a lot of them are simply online surveys or quick online studies, so maybe a dozen or so. But
Hmm.
some of them have been just literally online surveys. Some of them have been going in to be tested. It's hard because you have to find ones that are in your local area. I imagine in your area there's a lot because of Stanford University. But those I find very valuable.
Yeah, yeah, been true. Um, let's see. If anybody has questions, please send them in to the chat or the Q&A. We're happy to take them, but I will keep asking my questions. Let's see. Um, uh, So one thing we haven't talked about is what got you to write Living Parkinson's? Why did you say, "Oh my gosh, I have to devote all this time to writing down my thoughts"? What propelled you there?
It was interesting. Like I mentioned, I try to break down a problem a lot, and then I try to come back and like build it back up in a way that kind of sets it up where it's something that people where I can actually communicate with other people about it. Sorry about that. And one of the things I did is I kind of started to do what I did with Parkinson's. A couple of friends of mine said, Steve, do you ever think about communicating this to other people? And because I kind of built it up and structured it that way, I never thought about writing a book, but they kind of convinced me to do it in that way as opposed to just speaking about it. And I kind of, came up with the framework of 7 strategies, ways you can improve things, which is really just what I ended up doing for myself, but I packaged it up a little bit.
Hmm. Another thing is, what did you learn through the process of writing the book? How long did it take you to write the book, and what did you learn?
It was interesting. It took me about a year to write the book. Once I got going and I got a formula for doing it, it moved a lot quicker. But it kind of, I had a couple friends. One was an author that convinced me to do it that kind of helped me. And I had another one that was a writer that helped me work on the final touches. But we ended up getting it done in about a year. And it was a great experience. I mean, it challenged me a lot.
Hmm. And let's see, one thing we also haven't talked about is your diagnosis story. You were, you were 55 years old. What took you to the physician?
Robin, can I ask a question? I really apologize. Can I take a break for 1 second? Somebody's just banging at my door. I'll be right
Of
back.
course, yeah, we can't hear it, but you certainly can.
Be right back. Sorry.
Sure, take your time. And I hope some of you will have some questions. I have a few more left, but we've gone through a lot of my questions. Let's see. And let me tell you now, while we're waiting for Steve to come back, we have our speaker lined up for May. Let's see, what is the date in May? The date in May the second Wednesday of May will be the 13th, May 13th. And similar to Steve, we have a lady named Dr. Sarah Whittingham. She is a MD, and she has written a book on Parkinson's disease. It's called "Oh Crap, It's Parkinson's." I love that title. So we'll be hearing from her next week or next month as well. Okay, welcome back, Steve.
What about that? When you always get a delivery right in the middle of something like this. We're so
Oh, okay. No worries. We couldn't hear the door knock, so your microphone's a good one. So, all right. Diagnosis story.
sure. So it was kind of interesting. Probably about 7 years ago now, I was lying in bed with my wife, and she noticed that I had a tremor in my left hand. And I had always, like I mentioned, I'd been kind of a weekend athlete, gotten banged up here and there. I was going to just write it off, but she convinced me to go to see my doctor. I went to my doctor, and he kind of said it probably isn't anything big. I ended up going back a few months later, and he said, "Well, if you really want, you can go to a neurologist." So this was probably from March to July. And I remember it was July 17th. I went to a neurologist on my way to work. And I walked in, he said, flip your hands around, walk around the office, and probably what we all know now is a UPDRS, exam. And he walked out and came back in and said, "I think you have Parkinson's." And I remember it was, you don't even, I don't know about anybody else here. I had no concept of expecting to hear it. I expected to hear you have a nerve problem or you just have a muscle issue or something like that. And, that's again where I kind of compartmentalized it and said, I remember just saying, "Okay, you done?" And I went to work. He said, "It doesn't impact your life expectancy." I went to work, called my wife, but just still worked the full day and didn't really talk to her about it until I got home much. But it was kind of an interesting story. I know everybody has a different diagnosis story. Some people I've heard a bit were actually almost relieved when they got their diagnosis because they've been through so many treatments and even years of people trying to figure out what they had. Mine was a little bit more straightforward in that I just had the tremor. It just took a while to get to the right doctor who basically diagnosed it.
Yeah. Somebody asks, you mentioned earlier about having a slow progression. Can you talk more about that? What sort of symptoms have you had?
Sure, that's a great question, actually. So I started with a tremor in my non-dominant hand, which is my left hand. So I'm a very dominant right-handed person. I do almost everything right-handed. It was my left hand, and it didn't happen that much. And again, like I said, I wasn't even on medication for a while. Probably in retrospect, what I do now is I look back. Probably had some, I would call it slowness in my digestive system, a little bit of the constipation. I think I have what is the delayed gastric emptying. I forgot what the medical term is for that. Sometimes I feel like if I have a big meal, it just sits in my stomach and doesn't quite get out that fast. Takes a while to get out. So I,
Yeah. Gastroparesis, is that?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And but it's not like something that's been debilitating, but it's just something that I do notice. I do, in addition to the medication I take like a Miralax a little bit every day in the morning to just help me stay kind of moving, to help my system stay moving. Um, that's probably the biggest things I've had. I also have a little bit of restless leg in the evening. Sometimes if I sit too much, I get tingling in my legs and I'll stand up and do like I'll watch TV and do a little bit of, I guess, like almost like a stretching routine where I'll just stretch, do different stretches for 10 minutes and it feels better. When I do exercise and my meds are low, I get some dystonia in my feet. I get my toes cramping up. So I have little nagging things here or there, but usually they're pretty controllable. So when I talk about a slow progression, the tremor has not been something that's been that significant. And I haven't really had to increase my meds since I started them probably about 4 or 5 years ago. So that's
Mhm.
really what I kind of mean when I think of slow progression. And my UPDRS numbers have been maybe creeping up a little, but they're moving fairly slow. So
Yeah.
that's the way I think about progression.
Okay. And I remember in your book, you talk about at one point your UPDRS score had been very stable, and then suddenly it started to go up, and you kind of freaked out a little bit. You,
I
you
think
said, "Oh, I don't like this."
that was when I was going to first get put on medications. I think, it was kind of moving along. And when the doctor said, he examined me and, I didn't see that much different. He said, well, Steve, I think you might be better off on medication. That was kind of what led to that moment one time. So
Yeah, yeah,
one of the big things for me.
yeah, yeah. These are good questions, folks. So keep them coming. Let's see, what else do I have? What's your dose that stayed the same for several years?
Sure.
Somebody asks.
So I take Cinemet 3 times a day, and I believe it's the 2500. So I take it when I first get up, which is usually about 7 o'clock on an empty stomach. I take it about 1:30, but I try to time it more with my meal. And that middle one, if I'm working really hard during the day or really busy, sometimes I'll look at my watch and it'll be 3:30 and I don't even notice. And then the last one, I usually take around 8 o'clock, but if I eat a late meal, I want to keep it away from protein. So if I do have a late meal, I'll probably delay it till like sometimes 8:30 or 9. But those are the main ones I take. I do take at night a extended release Cinemet before I go to bed. That was more just to kind of, I used to get a little bit of restless leg in bed for a while, which kind of went away, and that was what the doctor recommended. But I
Mm-hmm.
also am on a very low dose in the morning of rasagiline, and I'm on a small dose of ropinirole in the afternoon, and that's more for the restless leg. I
Mm-hmm.
also
Hmm.
take magnesium in the afternoon for the restless leg, but it's just a normal dose.
Yeah, okay. I was going to ask you something. Oh, and then you mentioned about maybe having some dystonia if you're exercising and your Cinemet has been depleted. Do you time your medication at all, or do you time your exercise around your medication at all?
Yeah, I try to do that. Like if I'm going to go for a run, where I'm going to run for, let's say, 3 miles or more than, let's say, 25 minutes, I'll try to do it after the an hour after the medication. If I,
Mm-hmm.
I'll notice that it might be worse. Even like if I pedal the exercise bike in my basement, I'll notice after about a half an hour, I start noticing it. Same thing with the elliptical. Sometimes it just takes a few minutes of just kind of getting off and stamping my feet, just changing up the motion and then going back on, and it's better. And if
Yeah,
I do an event, then I'll take an extra pill and time it. My doctors have said that's no problem. So if I do an event starting 11 a.m., even though I take 7:30 and the 2 o'clock meds, probably like if it's an 11:30 event, at about 10:45, I'll take an extra pill just to kind of
right,
make sure it's
right.
good.
Yeah, Brian, I see you would like to be able to ask your question because your typing is terrible. So I'm going to say allow you to talk, and you should be able to talk. I don't think you're able to show your video, but go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, hear you
Yeah.
well.
So, actually, a couple of things. I had heard of an exercise study where the important thing was having your brain active as well. So, for example, I used to ride an exercise bike and I almost fell off one time. It was so boring. But if you're doing something like non-contact boxing, where you have to think, and table tennis, any kind of activity that is brain and exercise appears to be good. The other comment I'd make
Oh,
is
wait just a
yes,
second. So,
yeah,
Steve, do you want to comment on that about involving the brain?
No, I can't say from a doctor's perspective, but I've read the same thing you have in terms of things like neural, I think they call it neuromotor. Like if you're basically even counting or doing something while you exercise. I do the same thing with ping pong. I play with my wife downstairs sometimes, and I'll switch from my right hand to my left hand just to make sure I'm doing both sides. Um, One thing I started to do is I have this kind of walking treadmill. It's like a small treadmill, and I put it up against the wall, and I'll walk and throw balls up against the wall back and forth and try and do that at the same time to try and do a dual task exercise. Because I have heard that anytime you can do more than one thing at the same time, that is good. So I've read the same thing you have.
Hmm.
great, yeah,
Okay, go for number two, Brian.
yeah. So I've also had slow progression of Parkinson's for about 10 years, Then all of a sudden things changed, and I've rapidly deteriorated in a number of ways. And Ozzy Osbourne actually said this before he passed on, that Parkinson's for some people, it's like you're walking along a path, and all of a sudden you hit a trap door, and boom, you go way down, and things are more intense and challenging. So yeah, it's good to keep active.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks
I
for
hear,
commenting.
I know everybody has their own, their own journey with Parkinson's, and I mean, I'm sorry to hear about that. That recently you've had a more, tougher journey yourself, but I definitely, I think we all don't know to some extent what's exactly in store for us.
Okay, does anybody else need to speak their question rather than type it? Hadn't occurred to me, but I think that's a great idea if anybody else needs to speak. I know a Michael, I don't think it's a Michael who I see right now, but there was a Michael earlier who wanted to be heard. I don't know if he had a question.
There was
But
another one just popped up about Cinnamon.
oh, okay, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if I can answer that one. It was that, I've noticed many folks on the same Cinnamon dose of 2,500, be it early or later progression. Are there any studies looking if there's optimal lifetime dose? I believe that's the dose you get started on. Again, like I said, I can't comment on any medical check.
Yeah, that's definitely a starter dose. And I don't know if there are any, I haven't heard of any studies. Um, I think that everybody's optimal lifetime dose is unique to an individual. Uh, I know some people who go up to the limit very quickly and are able to stay on the limit for a very long time, and some people go up quickly to the limit and then need something like DBS, and some people seem very fine on what we would call a low dose or starter dose for a long time. But I think it's very individual, as Steve has suggested. Okay, there's another question. What kind of eating patterns do you have? Do you follow a particular diet?
That's a great question. I try to do as best as I can to do like the Mediterranean or the Mind diet, which again, those are, I think those are the ones that most of the organizations kind of feel, recommend for people with Parkinson's. They're pretty close to each other. I think the Mind is a combination of the Mediterranean and the low salt diet. I forgot the DASH diet for low salt.
Dash, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which I try to follow them. One of the things I talk about in my book is, for me at least, I try to follow what I call my 85% rule, which is, following any diet to the absolute 100% extreme. For most people, is pretty hard because there's always things you enjoy or don't enjoy. And I feel like I can make a compromise here or there along the way if it keeps me happier. So, for example, I know like, eating a bagel isn't the kind of thing, or drinking a Guinness or having a slice of pizza isn't on those diets. But if occasionally I do, if I can hold 85% of the diet or 90%, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job, and yet I'm still enjoying myself too.
Hmm.
So, um, but I mean, those are the types of diets that I think the general consensus is that you should try to stick to, is the Mind or the Mediterranean.
Yeah. And do you have, I know you have goals for exercise, and do you also have goals around diet and nutrition?
My biggest goal is just not to eat too much, really, because
Oh.
I enjoy eating more than I do for nutrition. Some people don't have that big an appetite. Again, that's one thing I've heard from Parkinson's. A lot of people lose weight. That's
Mhm.
something I've experienced. So, and for me, because I do work out a little bit more than average, I try to take a little bit extra protein in. But again, it's one of those things that I kind of believe that everybody, just like their Parkinson's is different, like nutrition in particular is so unique to people based on
Yeah, very
blood
true.
like that, getting your test done and then going to see a nutritionist or somebody that can make recommendations.
Yeah.
That's a great idea for people. I think I would, that's something I might suggest for people with Parkinson's, is just make sure you're getting good blood workups, and then consult with somebody that really can give you the right advice on if there's any changes to your diet you should do as a result of them.
Hmm. One thing, oh, who was at the door? That was a delivery person. Somebody asked in the chat. It was a delivery person for Steve. Um, let's see, one thing I read in the book which I liked. I think it might have been somebody's, hey, this book is so great blurb somewhere, but it says freedom, not freedom from the diagnosis, but freedom through movement, connection, knowledge, and everyday choices. I really like that concept that you're empowering people to be free through a bunch of through 7 strategies.
Yeah, and that's one interesting thing. If you think about the title of the book, really one of the things for me is I would still trade, I'd rather not have Parkinson's than have it. But what I try to do is in a sense make the best of it, which is, it's almost giving me a renewed purpose, trying to help as many people as I can, get the word out there as much as I can, do as much as I can for myself. But again, it's one of those things that the more you can feel in control, I think, the more at least you can give it, if you really try, and some people can't. I mean, I completely understand that some people's situations are really, really, it can be really very advanced or just very aggressive. But the more you can take control, at least from the people I spoke with, the more they feel gratitude actually for what they can control. So, I feel happy that, I still have a fair amount of control over my situation. It's not ideal. I'd rather not have Parkinson's. But the book, that's why I always say the book isn't a medical book. It's not a memoir. It's just different suggestions on ways people can maybe take a little bit more control of their situation and impact not only their attitude, but impact their, who knows, maybe impact even their progression. You never know.
Yeah, right. Okay, I don't see any more questions. Oh, do your muscles get tight? If so, which ones?
I, I, I do get tightness definitely in my like calves at times. I don't know how much of that is due to age, exercise, lack of stretching, which I'm not as good at as I should be. I should be stretching more, but I try to do more of that. Like again, one of the things I don't have time to do that I'd like to do is yoga, because I know that's supposed to be really good as you get older for stretching. Because I'm not very flexible in my for me, but my for me, it's personally my calves, but again, I know everybody probably could have something different with that.
Yeah. Another question is, do you focus at all on getting electrolytes?
Um, I'll be honest, for me, if I'm a few days before a serious event, if I'm going to be doing an exercise for like 2 hours, I will basically try to take a little bit extra electrolytes. I can't say whether it helps or it's just psychological. Again, some of the medical questions people are asking are great questions. I'm just not the person you really want to answer those. You really want to probably ask your doctor or nutritionist those types of things because I can only tell you what maybe works for me, but some of it, I'm always a believer that sometimes if you think it's going to work, you think it works, but it maybe is doing nothing. It's just a psychological factor. So I have certain things that I've tried to do for myself, but again, I don't do anything with electrolytes on a standard basis. It's more like when I have an event, I'll try to make sure I'm just really well hydrated and have electrolytes in me.
Yeah, okay. Um, Finally, what would you like to leave our group with today as some key takeaways?
I think to me, sometimes a lot of people ask that, and I would just say, look, what I've kind of learned is the more you can kind of be proactive and the more you're able to do that, it seems like that correlates with maybe a little bit better journey. Whether it impacts your systems or just impacts your psychology, your attitude, it's hard to say. But at least from the people I've met, the ones that are a little bit more taking it on head on seem to have maybe a little bit better experience. Again, that's all with a grain of salt that everybody's journey is a little bit different. But I would say that, there have been people, for example, that have asked me physical therapy classes that I've talked to that have said, what would you leave us with? And I always say, what I leave you with is try to understand the person you're working with because they're all different and try to meet them where they need to be met to get them going. And I would probably say the same thing to people that have Parkinson's, which is if you read a book like Living Parkinson's or something else, or just thinking about your situation, think about how you think you can use it to improve your journey in whatever way possible. It doesn't mean that everybody will use it the same way. If you find one thing in it or two things in it that help you, then hopefully I did my job and then maybe you'll be in a better place. So I mean, I that's what I try to do is just think of everything that at least in Living Parkinson's is a suggestion on how you might be able to help yourself. But in general, I would leave people with the advice of the more you can kind of take control of your journey, I think you have the potential to have a better outcome, or at least feel better about it.
Okay, and as a corollary to that, somebody asked, we do have quite a few caregivers, care partners on the webinar today in our interview today. What message would you have for caregivers or care partners? What should their takeaways be from your conversation or your book?
I think the care partners would be similar to what I said just before about like if I was talking to a therapist, which would be if you're a care partner, think about the person that you're taking care of. Think about what you think their specific journey's been like with Parkinson's, what their personality's like, the way they're wired. And think about how you can maybe give them the motivation they need. Some people it might be trying to encourage them to get into a class. Some people it might be encouraging them to set their own personal goal. Some people, it could be different for everybody. But I always feel like because Parkinson's is so unique, almost everybody's solution has to be a little bit unique. And if you take that in consideration and really think about the person as an individual and what might work best for them, I mean, I don't know what would work best for anybody. I know what worked for me, but I tried to put so many suggestions out there that anybody could find some things that might be good for them. And I would say maybe take the book or take the approach that way if you're a care partner, just as if you're a person with Parkinson's.
Yeah, I think that the book would be nice for a person with PD and a care partner, a caregiver to read together. You know, maybe read a few pages at a time and have some discussion about how it might apply to their own situation, the caregiver situation and the person with PD situation. I think that might, generate a lot of interesting discussion.
Yeah, that's it's a great suggestion because again, it's something that you're a team, right? Like you're
Yes,
the person
indeed.
team. So if you approach it as a team, reading the book at the same time or almost together and saying, how do we build our own plan? I always encourage people, use the book to build your own plan. And
Yeah.
that's something you could do together.
Yeah, and you give so many suggestions. And again, you have the interviews with the researchers and PD advocates and people living very well with PD. There's so many ideas covered in the book that I really recommend it to people as a great way to be exposed to a lot of ideas and find things that might work for your particular situation. So. Thank you. On that note, Steve, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all your time today and your writing such a wonderful book. And I've put the link to Steve's website, livingparkinsons.com, in the chat. And Steve has graciously allowed us to record the interview today, and we'll be posting that to our Palo Alto PD support group website soon. And we'll again link to Steve's livingparkinsons.com website. And you can find his book anywhere you are able to buy books these days. And you can also get a link to various booksellers from his website, livingparkinsons.com. So thank you again, Steve. Really appreciate it. And as I mentioned to everyone, our in May, our next speaker will be Dr. Sarah Whittingham. I believe Steve knows Dr. Whittingham. She has Parkinson's disease herself and has written a very funnily titled book called "Oh Crap, It's Parkinson's." So we'll be hearing from yet another wonderful speaker.
Yeah, she's great. She has this, you'll probably hear a lot of similar themes from her because she's very positive about how she takes her approach to Parkinson's. And I
Yeah, indeed, but we can learn from everyone, so it's a good thing. All right, everyone, thank you so much for coming, and thank you again, Steve. Appreciate it.
bye bye. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Bye bye. Thank you.